How big a mess has he made of this? If you're not across the story, you should know that the climb down essentially means that nobody who has been calling LBC for the last few months to describe how scared they were about the imminent impact of this cut, nobody is going to be affected. Only people who sign up anew for it from next November are going to be denied access to what everybody who's already on the books, on the disability and sickness benefits books, will receive. A lot of mileage expended yesterday, a lot of energy expended yesterday on mollifying the rebels, chief among whom Meg Hillier and Debbie Abrahams were in 24 hours of talks. I mean, not non-stop, I'm sure they went to bed. But the bottom line is, it is being presented as another U-turn. It is being presented as a platform of massive concessions. And it is, however you want to cut it, I'm afraid, it is the polar opposite conduct of what Keir Starmer insisted he would be doing for the last few weeks.
James, are you saying that Keir Starmer said something that wasn't true? I mean, this is your guy. This is your guy. I thought it was going to be the adults in the room. I thought it was going to be the sensibles in charge again. I thought we were returning to normalcy. We could go back to brunch. The quiet was nice. Bit of a weird admission, isn't it, James?
We've lost one front bencher already, the government will be saying to itself, and we can't afford to lose any others. Therefore, we need to reach this agreement. They've offered massive concessions, which should be enough to get the bill over the line at a second reading. We always wanted to protect the most vulnerable, not to destroy the bill or cause the government trouble. We always hoped there would be an off-ramp, and that's what we have now.
So again, just showing to everybody that the rebels, I mean, at least the proportion of them that are now happy with these very small changes, are people who basically only really cared about the electoral consequences because of the backlash, rather than the actual utility of the problems here, where, of course, they're very happy for a certain section of the public, a certain tier of the public, to not have access to the PIP payments that they need. Because if you personally believe that the utility of this policy is bad because there are certain people who need certain PIP help who would then not get it after those reforms, that should apply to people whether they are existing PIP claimants or whether they are new ones, right? If the distinction here is what about what existing disabled people think about us in the short term, then what you are telling us is this is about the political consequences of what the public do, and not actually about whether or not that we are immiserating disabled people unfairly, because you will be doing so just for new claimants.
So government and rebels trying to portray this as a successful listening exercise. I think 6 months ago I'd have joined in, but there's been too many now. The winter fuel allowance and now the welfare bill were both tattooed onto the foreheads of Labour MPs. They had to bang on doors, they had to go out on the stoop and sell these policies to the people and insist that they were necessary. Insist that they were necessary. And then they said suddenly, oh no, they weren't necessary after all. I don't know what you do for a living. I'm trying to think what the equivalent would be in your job. And you're sort of assured by your boss that something is absolutely necessary, even though it's unpopular. And you pass that on to your customers or your clients, your voters, and you deal with all the flack that's thrown up as a consequence. I don't think there's an equivalent in my world. You deal with all the flack that has been thrown up as a consequence. And then just as you're sort of dusting yourself down, picking yourself up and starting all over again, they announce that, no, actually, we're not going to do that. I don't know that this is actually as egregious as the winter fuel climb down.
Well, okay, I'll let him finish the sentence.
But I do know that the tone of political reporting has changed, and it's changed so much that you have to begin to ignore it. There's not going to be a leadership challenge anytime.
There should be a leadership challenge. Like, how are you coming to this conclusion, James? Of course there should be a leadership challenge. The man is hated by his own members, his own party, the general public. He's the most hated Prime Minister in the shortest span of time since Liz Truss, right? How is there not going to be a leadership challenge when it's clear that this man hasn't got a fucking clue what he's doing? What? And how is it not as bad as the winter fuel climb down? I guess maybe he's saying in terms of the utility of the policy, in which case, you know, climbing down on this policy, which is obviously worse, is a better climb down. But he hasn't even really climbed down. Because again, like, in however many years, It's going to be the majority of people who could claim PIP under the previous regime who are now not going to be able to. Give it a few decades or whatever, unless someone comes in and wants to slash these even more, because of course that's what a Reform UK want to do and would do and will do when they win the next election. So in terms of how they've climbed down, it's being remedied in a worse fashion, right? The remedy for the winter fuel payment was literally perfect. It was the perfect remedy. It's what I said they should have done at the start. And the fact they didn't even consider it just shows you how bereft of ideas they are, that they have to essentially wait for YouTube streamers to give them the idea on how to make the policy not shit. Whereas on this one, they've looked at the shitty policy and go, well, how about we create a two-tier welfare system and then we'll calm the rebellion? Which shows you that none of these people care about whether the policy is good, because the policy still sucks. Because the negative utility is still applying to at least somebody. Just people who are less politically relevant electorally.
Soon. Keir Starmer is in the job for another 4 years, possibly, before he has to call a general election. He might call one sooner, and yet something about this story speaks to something, as we touched on yesterday, as we discussed yesterday. Something about this story speaks to something that runs a lot deeper. I suppose what I want to know from you is whether you're going to buy the idea that it is the result of a successful negotiation, or whether Keir Starmer now looks like somebody who can never stick to his own guns.
Wow. Do you want to have a look at all of the pledges from the leadership election? Has he stuck to any of those guns, James? Should we have a look and see? What about the waspy women? Not that I agree, but those were his guns originally. Weird, isn't it? Oh, no. According to James, that's just part of politics when you lie to your own electorate. No, that's fine. He said it before. Remember when we were discussing Keir Starmer being a liar? It was like, well, he may have lied to the Labour electorate, but that's the cost of politics. You know, it's fine to lie to people who I dislike. Essentially, is the line that he goes with on this. And this idea that somehow Keir Starmer is a person who previously, up until now, was a man of principle and integrity, when he is distinctly neither of those things, is very funny to me. Oh, now you've noticed this man lacks integrity, James. Well, I'm glad that Captain Hindsight has realised this another 4 years down the line. Brilliant, well done.
On the really big stuff. On the stuff that his own MPs don't like. Fair play to the fella for sticking to his guns on farmers and VAT on private school fees. I like the Workers' Rights Bill. I like the renationalisation. There's quite a lot I like, and I'll run you through some of it shortly, because no one else in the British media is going to. But these two huge attempts to save the government money, and I think you have to be very undergraduate to think that is an unnecessary mission. You can, of course, reach immediately for a wealth tax, or you can immediately claim that we should be getting money from here, there, or everywhere.
I see he's moved on from calling people student politicians and now described it as undergraduate discourse. I'm like, I'm sorry. There are plenty of places I would be very happy to see cuts in government spending, and most of it's in the military, for example. And yet, when you say that, you just have to get the government bill down, you sound like Nick Ferrari in 2011 going, austerity is the medicine that this country needs, right? Our spending envelope is already not big enough, even after Rachel Reeves' tax rises. We are already trying to expect Scandinavian public services off the back of American taxation. We are still, in terms of the overall levels of taxation, lower than all of the countries in Europe that are better than us, right? They're just better, right? They're just better countries. I'm sorry, they just are, and they all have higher taxation levels than we do, on normal people and on rich people. And we should copy that model, because it's clearly better, has better standard of living, happier populations. So if you're saying, we should be doing... it's student politics to say that we shouldn't cut anything at all. I'm like, we need to be massively ramping up spending considerably, even after what we've already increased. And even then, if you even want to take it as read that some cuts are inevitable, we go after the disabled and the elderly. I'm not about that shit.
Everywhere, and I think there's some truth in that. But they're a mobile population, the mega rich. They're a very mobile population, more so perhaps than ever. And while a lot of the stories reporting an exodus of billionaires and millionaires turn out on closer examination to be a load of old toot, that there is only so much you can do before the pips squeak. And what they have attempted to do is trim spending. And you tell me how you respond to this latest development from Keir Starmer's government. 0345 6060 973, because the fear is that the people who welcome the climb down will not be improving their opinion of Keir Starmer.
No, of course we're not, because he's been forced into this. His failure at management, his failure at governance, the fact that this policy was going to go ahead up until the 11th hour, because for 9 months since this policy was fucking announced, they have not tried to win over their own MPs, right? This has been steaming in the background for 9 months, and he couldn't wait to negotiate on the position on this until the 11th hour, a week before the vote. Of course, I'm not changing my position on Keir Starmer. They were desperate to continue doing this, to plunge disabled people into poverty until they were literally forced to by a bunch of Labour MPs who were essentially doing this because of the public backlash and for no other reason. Outside of the 50 who are still opposed to it, which I commend. I commend those people, you know? Yeah, of course I'm not changing the position of Keir Starmer. I've changed my opinions on, maybe a couple of Labour MPs, members of PLP, who have twisted the knife and forced his hand. Those people I have a higher opinion of now than I used to. Because fundamentally, the fulcrum on which I can have respect for a Labour MP at this point is, do you vote for the welfare bill or not? And if you vote for it, you're a monster. I'm sorry. We have nothing in common. But of course I won't change my opinion on Keir Starmer just because he's been forced into a humiliating climb down. Because if I was to ever increase my opinion of him, he would have changed his opinion on this and told Morgan McSweeney no as soon as he'd found out from the government's own impact assessment that this change would impoverish children, little kids, and even that wasn't good enough to make him change his mind. Only the political humiliation of seeing to lose a vote in Parliament or to have to rely on the Tories for support is the only thing that got him to change his mind on this. Not the starving children, not the immiserated disabled people, not even the reality that those cuts would actually be the negative consequence of getting people out of work rather than getting them into work. None of these things changed his mind. Just the potential political humiliation of the challenge to his leadership that would happen should he lose a vote in the Commons on a key part of the fiscal programme that had been put in place and announced last year. Yeah, some human rights lawyer I know.
Is that right? Is that you? I'm glad he's climbed down, but I don't like him more as a consequence. I guess what I want you to tell me, and sorry for taking so long to get there, but I wanted to get a few other thoughts up and running this hour. I guess what I want you to tell me is what this makes you think of him, the Prime Minister. What this makes you think of him. And as ever on this programme, your opinion will always be more interesting if it is changing. If you thought he was absolutely awful or absolutely brilliant last week, last month, last year, and you still do, then great. But there's not a lot I can do with that. There's not a lot to explore, is there? There's not a lot to dig into. There's not a lot to explain.
Well, you have to explain it in terms of the reality of why the U-turn has happened. Again, the facts were there. It was going to put 250,000 extra people into poverty. As soon as you hear those words, as somebody who purports to have Labour values, that should turn you off instantly. That should be enough. That should be enough, right? That's why my mind will not change. My mind would have changed if he'd have come out and said, well, I've looked at the impact assessment. We now know that it's going to be terrible. We're not going to do it. Right? Maybe I could have been convinced to change my mind then, because that would be a response to the evidence, where they go, well, we need to cut the welfare bill. Here's a proposal. This proposal's really bad. It's going to put disabled people into poverty and not going to get them back into work. Okay, we won't do it then. Fine. Reasonable, perfectly reasonable position. I know it's going to put people into poverty. I know it's going to ruin people's lives. I know this being done just a penny pinch for the Treasury. I know that this is absolutely monstrous policy in terms of the level of suicide this could lead to. People will literally kill themselves because of this legislation, right? You look at all of this reams of evidence and you still are obsessed with pushing up to the 11th hour, so much so the people who have at least a modicum more of a conscience than you do, who you've self-selected to be an MP as your support in Parliament, they have to force you to climb down at the 11th hour. Nah, mate, not changing my opinion of you in the slightest. Not in the slightest.
So, you buy into nonsense like two-tier Keir or whatever the latest
But he is two-tier. There's a two-tier welfare system coming as the result of these reforms.
All right, trope might be. That's great. Good luck to you. but it's not very interesting. It's not very intellectually nourishing to examine how your mind works. What I am interested in is why things are changing. I'll examine why my own mind is changing a bit at the moment. I haven't quite pinned it down because, at least at first today, I'm more interested in you. So how does... And what I can't do is separate the media coverage from the reality. I'll show you what I mean. Massive concessions on welfare bill win over key Labour rebels. One front page. I'm not going to tell you which ones they are. Starmer caves in to rebels on benefits. Starmer caves in to rebels on benefits. Don't worry, I'm not repeating myself. That's two different front pages. New hope on PIPs. You see what I mean? A completely different tone, message, delivery. Labour rebels force Starmer to water down benefits.
I mean, it is true, actually, that a lot of the narrative from the media coverage here is about Keir Starmer's lack of leadership or Keir Starmer's perceived weakness in the face of rebel MPs. You know, we saw this from Andrew Bowie on Question Time. We've seen it from Kemi Badenoch on social media and in public statements from other politicians about, oh, well, this shows Keir Starmer is weak and he can't even bring his huge majority to heel. What a terrible leader he must be, that he can't immiserate the disabled and force his MPs to be able to support that too. And I'm like, I think you got the wrong end of the stick on what the reality is here, when of course one of those is new hope on PIPs, and that should be the narrative, right? The fact that the media in this country, again, full of privately educated, Oxbridge-educated bozos who all read the same papers, go to the same schools, go to the same cocktail parties, right? None of these people have looked at the reality of these things and gone, maybe the problem here is that it's going to be really bad for the disabled, right? Maybe the problem here is what's going to happen to disabled people in the wake of these cuts. No, they're going, well, look at the political machinations in Westminster. Look what's happening to dear Keir. He's going to be destroyed by his own MPs. How weak, right? We're going to borrow Blairisms that these people love to reach for from the annals of history, right? Because they love Blair, all of the media people in this country, right? And the fact that only one of those headlines focuses on the real people who are going to be affected by these changes, which isn't Keir Starmer. It's not Keir Starmer's wife, it's not Wahid Ali, it's not Morgan McSweeney, it's not all of the consultants that surround the government, and it's not Labour MPs. No. The people that are affected by this are the disabled people who will be potentially immiserated as a result of these changes, as the result of these reforms. Those are the real people. And the fact that only one paper who he read out there focused on those people shows you why all of this discussion is completely ridiculous.
Benefits cuts, all of that. What I can't do is distinguish between what we actually think and feel about the actions that have been undertaken and how much of what we think and feel is a consequence of being conditioned by coverage, of which we're part, aren't we? We are coverage. You and me, when we talk about stuff, are providing coverage. So let's cut away if we can. Let's cut through the noise. How does this particular move, this concession, this surrender, this back down, how does it affect your thoughts and feelings about Keir Starmer?
Well, at least he's admitting that he's noise. At least he's admitting that he is part of the commentariat, that he's part of the manufacturing of consent around public opinion. At least he's admitting this. But again, this is the man who wrote a book called How They Broke Britain and includes many media client journalists in this, when for the last 5 years he's just been a client journalist for the Starmer Project. I mean, too late to recognise your position as a manufacturer of consent now, James. Bit too late for that now, because the reality, of course, is that he is just a propagandist, you know? And the fact that Keir Starmer's obvious lies have been omitted from his coverage of Keir Starmer's premiership, both in the Labour Party and in terms of the country, again, should be how we broke Britain. Look at the way he treated Corbyn, right? And I can't help but thinking that half of this is just, I think that Keir Starmer is fundamentally a decent man, and therefore I want to like him, because all they do is focus their mind in terms of politics on what Boris Johnson was like in terms of Brexit, what Boris Johnson was like in terms of Brexit, what Boris Johnson was like in terms of how he managed the Parliamentary Conservative Party and how much of a buffoon he looked, right? And so there's this optical position they look at as Keir Starmer in comparison to the Conservative leaders of yore. And I'm like, well, sure, maybe he's a more polished politician, whatever, but the reality is it's the policy that's the problem. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.